We're going to be continuing on this morning in 1 Corinthians. If you've been with us, we've been moving through this letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. And this morning we're up to a chunk that we're going to do, chapter 12 right through to chapter 14. So we're going to do a bit of a big chunk, but we really do need to do it all together because it is all interwoven. It's all part of one sort of argument from Paul. So if we pull it apart and only do bit by bit, we might miss what Paul's saying. So we're going to do a bit of a chunk there. We won't read the whole thing, but it's also probably one of the most well-known parts of 1 Corinthians in here. Obviously, 1 Corinthians 13, you guys have probably heard it at numerous weddings and things like that. It's the famous love poem there in the middle, but it's in the middle of what Paul is trying to say to the Corinthian church here, and so we're going to put it in that context as we go through. But at the start of this section, he starts a new section. He's addressing a new problem that the Corinthian church have written to him about. And again, we have to make assumptions about what the question was based on Paul's answer because we don't have a record of the letter that the Corinthians sent to Paul and exactly what the issue or question was. But we can pretty well see here that there's a bit of a disagreement, once again, seems to be quite a few at the Corinthian church, a disagreement about spiritual manifestations or spiritual gifts, and which one is greater, which one is better. And we can see that underneath this question is, of course, the question by implication of who is better. Because if one gift is better than another, and if one person has that gift, then by implication is not that person better than the person who has the lesser gift? And so we're faced again with this plague of otherness that is plaguing the Corinthian church and plagues our entire secular society of who is right, who is better, who has authority over who is more spiritual. This whole idea that there is other, and people are other to me, and if they're other to me, where do I stand in relation to them? Am I above them or below them? Because heaven forbid that I be next to them as a brother or sister. But let's have a look at Paul's response. 1 Corinthians 12, 1-7. Let's read it with me. Oh, thank you, Olivia. Big thank you to Olivia, actually, this morning. She filled in last minute, and she's doing a great job. So thank you, Olivia. Sometimes it's rough being related to a pastor, I think. Now, about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. You know that when you were pagans, somehow or other, you were influenced and led astray to mute idols. Therefore, I want you to know that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, Jesus be cursed. And no one can say, Jesus is Lord, except by the Holy Spirit. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. So, what's not immediately obvious in our English translations, especially in the NIV version that we just read from there, is Paul actually switches the terminology from verse 1 to verse 4 here. In the beginning where it says now about the gifts of the Spirit in the NIV version, or in some versions it might be spiritual gifts, or in some versions it might be spiritual manifestations. The Greek word there is pneumatica, which is the standard word for just spiritual things. Spiritual things, or if it's the masculine take on it, it is actually spiritual persons. And so there's this impression that the Corinthians have written to Paul about spiritual things. But in verse 4, Paul flips it around and he starts using the Greek term charismata, which is gifts of the Spirit. And so immediately he is addressing the Corinthians and reminding them that this is not just spiritual things, that any spiritual thing or any spiritual manifestation or any spiritual person, if that is the translation of it, is spiritual by and from God. It is the gift of the Spirit to them. And so if it is a gift, who can boast? Who can boast if it is not from them, and if it is not innately within them or from any power inside of them? They are not spiritual people. They are gifted the Spirit by their God. So he starts right in with that to remind the Corinthians that we're talking about something that comes from God, and it is a gift. That start of that word charismata is charis, which you guys may know is the word for grace. It's the word that we translate grace, that gift of God to us, that we do not earn because of anything inside of us. It is His gift to us. And he also reminds them in verse 7 that these gifts have been given by God for the good of all the people. So they're not given as gifts to the person that they are given to for the good of that one individual. They are given as gifts for the good, for the common good of the family of God, this new people, these Christians. And to emphasize it in verse 3, and sometimes this has been taken out of context to mean all sorts of things, but when he says, nobody can say Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit, what he's saying is, because to declare Jesus as Lord is one of the foundational things to express the fact that you are a believer. If you look at Romans 10:9 or Philippians 2:11, for example, you would express that Jesus is Lord. And that was a part of you become baptized, you express that Jesus is Lord, and you become part of this new family. So what Paul is saying here is not some fancy thing like, well, if you've got this, no one can say it except by the Spirit. What he's saying is that every single believer can say it because the Spirit has allowed them to say it. This is not some special thing. But if you want to say, I'm more special than this person because I have this spiritual gift, or I'm more, I should be taken more seriously than this other brother because of the spiritual manifestation that God works through my life, Paul is saying that the Spirit of God is at work in every single believer because they could not be a believer without the Spirit of God. And so you can't sit there and say, well, the Spirit's in me, but not in them. Because Paul is saying if they declare that Jesus is Lord, they have done so by the Spirit, and the Spirit is within them. And it means the Spirit is within you if you have declared that Jesus is Lord. So the overall picture that we get in the start is really quite remarkable. It actually is quite remarkable to see that Paul is just expecting that the Corinthians will understand and know that the community of faith, this Christian community of faith that's blossoming at this time, is to be filled and empowered by the Spirit of God and of these extraordinary gifts that they talk about. He sort of lists some of the gifts within this, and it's not meant to be a comprehensive list, but he's going through some of these gifts, and there's just the expectation that these are almost part of everyday Christian life for these people. He doesn't have to try and tell them to look for these things or anything like that. He just says it as if it is part of their everyday gathering. And it seems like it was. And the fact that they're going to him and they're talking about, which gift is better, suggests that these gifts were manifest all the time when they're gathering together. What faith, like we talked about this morning, what faith to envision a community that is empowered by the Spirit of God, where He is palpably present and operating through the complementary gifts of the various members of His family. Healings and miracles, revelatory speeches, prophecies, tongues, all of these things were just everyday occurrences of the Spirit-empowered community. And Paul moves in now to, again, quite a famous part of this letter, where he uses a metaphor to explain how all this works. And it's the metaphor of the body. The body. Let's look at, this is in verse 12 to 31 of chapter 12, but let's just look at verse 12 to 14 together. Just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. So Paul is saying, absolutely, the family of God is filled with these spiritual manifestations, these gifts from God. And these gifts are for the common good of the whole people and of unbelievers, that they might see the power of God at work in His people. But which gift is better? Which gifts are more important? Paul says, no. That's not how it works. If you've got a body, does the hand say to the foot, this is where it goes on. Does the hand say to the foot, we don't need you? Does the eye say to the ear, we don't need you? We know this well, so I'm not going to dive into it. But Paul really, he doesn't just pick a random metaphor here. He doesn't just come up with the first thing that comes to mind and a human body, that kind of works well. Let's use that as an analogy here and hope that sticks. He's very careful with the metaphor that he chooses here. Because within this metaphor, we can hear links back to creation of the first body that was formed by the hands of God. We also see, it's quite remarkable and it's so easy to miss, but in verse 12 there, he says, but all its parts form one body, so it is with Christ. Now, what we'd expect him to say there would be the body of Christ. But he just says Christ. And he doesn't say Jesus, he says Christ, which is, as we know, is Messiah. And we can see from Paul's other uses where he talks about the Messiah in his other letters and his other writings that we have, is that Paul very much sees, as the Jewish people did, that the Messiah was to be representative of all the people of Israel. That the Messiah to come through his acts and through his deeds and through his fulfillment of who he was, he would come to represent all the people. All the people would be represented in this one figure. And we see all that through our salvation talk when we talk about that God was representative for all of our sins. He was representative for all the people. And Paul is linking the Corinthian church and all believers into Christ. He is saying that you are now representative of a new people. That there is a new people of God being formed. Some of them are Israelites, some of them are Gentiles, some of them pagans, as he uses the word above, which is the same word Gentile there, non-Jewish people. But this new people of God is being formed, and they are representative. He's also using a metaphor that would be known in the time and was used in the time. For example, we have a fellow called Menelaus, and he told the story about a body. He used the metaphor for the body. He told this fable to a bunch of soldiers about the parts of the human body and how each has its own purpose in the greater function of the body. The rest of the body thought the stomach was getting a free ride. So the body decided to stop nourishing the stomach. Said, no, we're not going to keep giving you food because you don't do any work. You just sit there, we feed you, and you don't do anything for us. But soon the other parts realized that they were running out of energy to do anything because they weren't filling the stomach, which was giving them the energy to work. But you see, Menelaus used this metaphor to try and put down a slave uprising. By saying, because the slaves were saying, hey, look, we're doing all the work while you wealthy elites up there do nothing at all. You just get fat off all our work. And so Menelaus is saying, hey, no, you need the elite. Because if if they aren't paying for then you'll have nothing left. So Menelaus is using this sense, but Paul he takes that and he flips it on his head, and he doesn't use it to try and subject one person below another. He uses it to say that all people are part of the one body, and that every part is useful and significant, that no part is greater than any other part of the body, that it's not about the different parts of the body working for the stomach. He is saying that if the eye doesn't work, then the body is missing out on something. That if the hand isn't working, the body is not functioning the way it can, no matter what the body part is. And he goes on and talks about that. And he goes on and talks about how strange it would be if there was a body that was made up all of one part. Do we have it? Is it going to work? No. Did you guys do some wonderful drawings for me? They were awesome drawings. What's that? All right, kids, can you guys bring your drawings up? You guys will just have to look closely. If you're happy to bring your drawing up and share your drawing with us. Sorry, we did hope to put them up there, but technology. We should have prayed for that, really. Should have known. What have we got here? Can you turn around and show everyone, show all these people? Here we go. Look at that. Are they eyes? Lots of eyes. You think that looks lovely? It is. That's wonderful. Fantastic. What have you got here? You show everyone. What's your person made up of?
He's made up of an eye.
He's lots of eyes too. Yeah. Oh, you guys. Oh, he looks very angry. He looks great. Very cool. Thank you for that. Can you guys see? Sorry, you guys can't see very well. Hold him up nice and tall. What have we got here?
A tummy.
Come this way, and then we might be able to. Oh yeah, here we go. Keep coming. And I'll hold it up. Up. Oh, look at that. Here we go. Can you sort of see it there? What's it made up of? Tummies. Is this a stomach monster? All made up of stomachs. Very cool. Thank you so much. Come on over. Lift it up nice and high. There we go. Oh, it just looks white. Too much light. Oh, sorry, guys. What have we got here?
It's made out of it's made out of heads.
Heads. A whole body made out of heads. It looks a little bit like a snowman, doesn't it? It's very cool. Thank you very much. And lollipop trees. Excellent. And what do we got here? Bring it over this way. Oh, here we go. Is it? Oh. No, all right, we're trying. Fingers. The body of finger. Oh, look, he's got finger here, finger mouth, finger eye. Is that a finger dog? Excellent. Even a finger dog. Come on over. Thank you guys so much for doing all your drawings. Jill's been busy.
This is my picture. It's a heart man with heart hands and heart eyes. And I did two. This is my hand man. So,
Handyman. Handyman. Is Duncan a handyman? Yeah. Lifting it up. Oh, there we go.
Eyes.
Eyes. Another body full of eyes there with one big one in the middle where his stomach should be. Sometimes your stomach's all eyes, isn't it? Come on. What have you got here? No. Okay. We got fingers. A tiny little finger person. Are they what kind? Which finger? Pointer finger. Very cool. Thank you so much. Come on over. What have you got here? Can I lift it up into the which way around? Here we go. So what have you drawn? A person. Are we up? Ooh. There is a person on there. That's very cool. What's your person all made up of?
With eyes and a mouth and legs and ears and
Exactly like a person should be made up of. Thank you so much. Well done. And last one. Here we go. And what is yours all made up of?
eyes.
Eyes. Another one made up of eyes. Thank you so much. All right, well done, guys. Give them a hand. Didn't they do well? Sorry that didn't work as quite as well, but you guys did a great job. Thank you so much. But as you can see, a body that is made up all of one body part can either look very cute if you're drawing hearts and hands, or it can look quite grotesque, really, can't it? It's not normal. It's not the way things should be, and it's the same that Paul is saying. I mean, imagine a community of faith where everyone was the same, where everyone believed the same thing, wore the same thing, all had the same skin color, all just did whatever everyone said, all had the same culture, all had the same background, all were just clones of each other. That would actually be quite unnatural. Paul is really saying that the diversity and the interdependence of the Christian community is what makes it so beautiful. That it is made up of so many different people who have been given all these different gifts, and it is the working together of those that make one beautiful, glorious body that is representative of Him. And Paul doesn't just stop there because he's addressing something directly with the Corinthian church in this body metaphor, but he actually goes further in verse 23 to 26, and he actually talks about those body parts that may be seen as inferior are actually some of the most important body parts we have. And we won't go into details, but they're the body parts that he talks about that get covered in clothing, specifically a loincloth and things like that. So he's talking about those body parts of the members that are disrespectful, those parts that we don't go flaunting around, hopefully, but those parts of the body that we might see, that some might see as inferior, are actually extremely important parts of the body. And so he's addressing once again this idea within the Corinthian church that a person could be above another person because of the gift that God had given them. And he also goes on to talk about how when something affects one member of the body, one part of the body, it affects the whole. And if anyone here has ever had a toothache, you know exactly what he means. That something so small within the body can drain every ounce of energy you have, every amount of focus comes down to that one little point of pain. And again, Paul, in his masterful way, says, it's the same with you guys. If one of you is hurting, you're all hurting because you are a family. You are one body. If one of you is glorified, lifted up, then hey, you are all lifted up. So this is what Paul has been going through verse 12, this bringing down of this idea that one gift is greater than the other. So then it can be a bit surprising if you read through 1 Corinthians 12, when you get to verse 31, and it says, earnestly desire the higher gifts. Well, if all the gifts are equal, what are these higher gifts now, Paul? What are you doing to us? You've just told us that all the gifts are equal and there are no higher gifts, and then you turn around and tell us, or tell the church in Corinth and to us, to earnestly desire these higher gifts. So what are these higher gifts? And that's where chapter 13 comes in. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul talks about the higher gifts and the highest gift there is. 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. And so Paul brings all this down and focuses all this to the most important gift of God, the gift of love. He does not diminish all these other gifts that come from God, that all have a place within the community of faith, but he grounds them all in the foundation of the greatest gift of all, God's gift of love. And we think about that body metaphor again, that's all part of this. And we go back to creation, remember that God formed Adam and Eve, and then he breathed life into Adam. He filled Adam with his spirit. And Paul is saying, as a new people, as a new body formed by God, God has breathed his spirit into you. And that's why you're seeing these gifts of the Spirit, but the greatest gift and the absolute mark of a people who have the Spirit of God is love. This is how you can tell whether a people have the Spirit of God, that they love one another. We know John 13:35 very well. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. The mark of those who follow God and are empowered by his Spirit is love. In 1 John 4, the author is focusing with a very similar issue that Paul is working through here with the Corinthians around the topic of discerning the spirits. What spirits are good and what spirits might be evil or malicious. And in 4:7-21, we won't read the whole thing, but you can go and look at it later. 1 John 4:7-21, the author of that letter brings it down, but what he says, here's just 1 John 4 verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And so what he's saying there is the same thing Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians. If you want to know if someone is filled by the Spirit of God, simply ask the question, do they love? Because that is what the Spirit of God does within us. It draws us out into love for Him and to love one another. Now, this is quite a remarkable point that Paul is making as he addresses this. And I think it's still a point that can be relevant today. That the sign of the Spirit working amongst a group of people, a group of believers, is not within miraculous healings or prophecies or speaking in tongues or charity, but authentic love worked out among those people. That's very similar to what Jesus says in Matthew 7:22 in his parable about the people come before the throne of God and say, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not drive out demons? He says, away from me, I did not know you. That these spiritual manifestations, these spiritual gifts, are not a sign of God's presence, but that love is. That all of these things are worked out from a place of love. He is not saying that we should despise any of those things. Heaven forbid it. He is encouraging it. And as we are encouraged today to pursue the gifts of the Spirit, that we would see within our faith community His Spirit worked out amazingly. But what we desire more than anything else is His Spirit worked out amongst us to draw us into love for Him and love for one another. And Paul really re-emphasizes this in chapter 13, 8 to 13. When he talks about how all these other things will come to an end, but that love endures forever. Because Paul again has this idea of eternity in mind, where he says there will come a time when prophecy will no longer be required, because all will see God face to face. There will be a time when miracles and healings are no longer required, because all will be full and well. But he says there's never going to be a time when love is not required. That as we love now, that love reaches into eternity. That love will never die. That's a really powerful thought. Hugely powerful thought. And that's what Paul's saying here. Not that any of these gifts, not that prophecy are bad, not that faith is bad, not that healings are bad, not at all. That's not what he's saying. He's saying they are great. But he's saying if those things are not worked out in love for the good of all, then what is it all for? What good is it all for if there is not love? The love that will endure forever. And then he leads on to this in chapter 14. Sorry, I realize I'm getting late, so I'll move quickly now. In chapter 14, he continues on to this argument. He brings it back around after he's got this beautiful love poem in the middle that grounds everything. In chapter 14, 1 to 4, he says this. You can follow along with me. Follow the way of love and eagerly desire gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. For anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to people but to God. Indeed, no one understands them. They utter mysteries by the Spirit. But the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. Anyone who speaks in a tongue edifies themselves, but the one who prophesies edifies the church. So again, he's coming back, and it seems like the Corinthians have put two before him. What's better, Paul? Is it better to speak in tongues or is it better to prophesy? Tell us, Paul, which one's better? And Paul, right through this argument, is trying to say there isn't one better than the other, because the moment you go there, you start thinking that the people who manifest them are better than each other, and all are a gift from God, and all are there to build up. But he does come down, and he now says, if you were to seek anything other than obviously the gift of love, which he's already talked about, he's already said, if you're going to seek anything, seek the gift of love. But he says now, seek especially prophecy, because prophecy builds up the body. Because prophecy helps open the eyes of others to the truth that God has to say. Walter Brueggemann says, the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and the perception of the dominant culture around us. And that is exactly what Paul is doing in this letter, and exactly what Paul is doing in this argument. He is saying to the people in Corinth, in the church of Corinth, he is saying that instead of trying to find out how you can get above one another, instead of trying to find out how you can trot on each other to get a little bit higher, like everything in society will tell you to do, he says God's way is different. God's way is grounded in a love that is worked out toward each other. That God desires unity and love for them above all. That God is less interested in who's doing what and more interested in how they are loving and caring for each other. And in verse 18 and 19, just in case the Corinthians reading through this have got to the point of going, see, I told you prophecy was better than tongues. I was right, you were wrong, see? He says, I thank God that I speak in tongues more than all of you. He lifts it up again and he says, this is not about tongues being lesser or bad or anything like that. He is grateful for the gift of tongues in his own life and the gift of tongues in the life of the Corinthians. But he says, in your gatherings, but in church, I would rather speak 5 intelligible words to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue. And that's all going back to the whole argument that he's brought before at the start of 14, that tongues might not be building up the people that they're around. And so if it's not for the good of others, is the gathering the best place for it? He does not diminish the gift or try to quench what God is doing, but he ensures all the gifts are situated within the foundation of love for each other. And this is what Paul has been doing right through this letter. As we've seen him address each of these different situations, we can see that Paul is bringing it back to, hey guys, the most important thing is that you love one another. A Christian community that confesses a gospel of love but abides in division, power plays, and pride is unfit to bear the name of the living God. This is what Paul is saying to the Corinthian church. He's saying a Christian community that manifests spiritual gifts and power but does not live out cross-shaped love within and without is a resounding gong. But what he says to them is a Christian community that recognizes that they have been resurrected with the Messiah. That they are a new people who live out of the gift of his grace and abide together in the gift of his love. And who stand in stark contrast to the selfish struggle of this world and point forward to the future reality of his kingdom come. That is what Paul is calling the Corinthians to be. And that is what Paul is calling us here in our church family to be. That it is not about who is better, who has this, who has that. It is, do you love me? And do you love each other?